Let's open our Bibles to 2 Peter chapter 3. We're looking this evening at standing before Jesus. We're looking at, as Luke 21 said this morning, that we should watch and pray. Watch, not get hypnotized by the world, not fall asleep, not lose track of what we're here for, and pray. One of the most descriptive words. It's always used for how people came to Christ, falling down on their knees and begging for things. Remember, I beg you to heal my son who's always thrown in the fire. I beg you to heal my daughter, she's dead. I beg you to deliver, this or whatever. The leper came and said, I beg you to cleanse me. That's the word. We're supposed to pray that we be found worthy at His coming when we stand before Him. Why? Well, look at 2 Peter 3 and verses 10 and 11. I just want to emphasize with you, Peter, I think of him as a wizened, gnarled, deeply tanned, with lots of wrinkles. He's I can just see his hands. Can you imagine those net-pulling hands, those big paws he had? As he sits down and the Spirit of God speaks through him and says, look at verse 10, but the day of the Lord, to just buzz in your mind, that's the Old Testament concept. The day of the Lord is the concept of all the events of the second coming. The day of the Lord's wrath, the day of the Lord's return, all that. So the day of the Lord, that's the end of the world, okay? The day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise. So this is the culmination of everything. This is the end. And the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up. Now look at this. Day of Lord, heavens pass away, elements melt. The earth and the works in it will be burned up. Verse 11. Therefore, since all these things will be dissolved. Now just for a second, look up from your Bible and just go like this and look around you. Everything you see, and when you drive home tonight, everything you see, and when you fly on a business trip this week, everything you see, and when you get to your house, everything you see, except for the people around you, everything that's precious, that we save, that we guard, that we have in our safety deposit boxes or wherever you put your special things, are all going to burn up, okay? Seeing all these things will be more than burned up. Bonnie and I once had a home that burned. And, when things burn, they don't really burn. They just get all smoky. And, firemen are so good that they get it usually before it does too much, just ruins everything. So you still have them. They're just wet or yellow or black or stink. You know what I mean? But most things you don't. Look what he says. It doesn't just say that little smoke damage, a little darkening here. Everything will be dissolved. Every trophy, every trinket, every treasure, everything we work long and late and hard until exhaustion and sick and we're anxious over and it's so important to us and we get upset when it gets broken or someone kicks it or scratches it or touches it or whatever. Everything, verse 11, will be dissolved. Because of that, isn't he a good preacher? Look at how the punchline. What manner of persons ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness? You ever eaten with someone famous? Remember this morning, a lady in the Oasis flock came to me and knew exactly the month and day and year when she had Dr. Francis Schaeffer at her home here in Tulsa and was sitting across the table. And if you ever heard of Francis Schaeffer and How Then Shall We Live and all of his monumental works, he was right here in her home in Tulsa. I mean, she glowingly talked, it was in 1971, I think she said, so it was 34 years ago. She talked about it like it was last night. You know why? He was a monumental person in her life. Now, can you imagine getting to sit across the table from the Lord? That's what you're doing. And what he's saying is, you're on your way home. You're on your way to meet me. You're on your way to stand before me. But before that, we have these little reminders of what you're here for. And because everything's going to be dissolved, verse 11 says, what manner of person, what manner of husband, what manner of wife, what manner of dad, what manner of mom, what manner of child should you be in all holy conduct and godliness? It's a great question to ask, because we have an appointment. And everything that we have held dear on earth is going to be dissolved. And only what we let go of and gave to the Lord, and it was actually sent ahead to heaven, remains. And so he's saying, what should you live for, since everything's going to be dissolved? Let me read to you about that moment, and then we're going to go through it in the Scriptures. In fact, you can be turning with me to Romans 14. Okay, that's our next stop in the Bible. So, Romans 14. But in the not too distant future, God is going to invade His world. The last time He invaded it, He came disguised as a baby. Okay? And He died a sacrificial death for the sin of the world. This time, He's not going to be hiding. As Peter says, when He comes, the elements are going to melt with fervent heat. The place is going to fall apart. That invasion is called His second coming. And at Christ's return, the staggering truth is, everyone in that moment, it will be revealed what they really were. Now, I just want to read to you 3 little paragraphs from C.S. Lewis, Clive Staples Lewis, the prolific writer. This is what he says. When that happens, he's talking about the second coming of Christ, it's the end of the world. It's when the author walks onto stage. The play is over. That's insightful. God is going to invade, all right, but what good is it saying you're on His side then when you see the whole natural universe melting away like a dream, and something else, something it never entered your head to conceive, comes crashing in? He's talking, by the way, this is mere Christianity. He's talking to worldlings who don't believe very much. So he's trying to describe Christ. Something so beautiful to us and so terrible to others that none of us will have any choices left. For this time it will be God without disguise. Something so overwhelming that it will strike, here's the 2 haves and have-nots, those that have the Son and those that don't. It will strike either irresistible love, that's to us that love Him and long for Him, or irresistible horror into every creature. It will be too late then to choose your side. That's why his books have been used so much. Worldlings like this way of having it presented. He was gifted. There's no use saying you choose to lie down when it's impossible to stand up. That will not be the time for choosing. It will be the time when we discover which side we really have chosen, whether we realize it or not. You see, what he's saying is that at the second coming, finally, everyone will know what only we know right now, what we're really living for, what you're really living for. Just being here doesn't mean anything in particular. You might be here because you have to be here. Maybe this is the only place to go. Maybe someone made you come. Maybe you've always come. Maybe there's something you want to go to afterward or meet someone. There are many reasons people are here. But in that day when God comes crashing in, He's going to reveal what people really were. Lewis ends with this: now, today, in this moment, now is your chance to choose the right side. God is holding back to give us that chance. That chance will not last forever. Take it or leave it. That's to worldlings. For us, for believers, that revelation, that revealing of what we really live for comes earlier. That's in Romans chapter 14. It's called Christ's judgment seat. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, are we ready? Are we ready for what He's going to ask us? Our future is all about little choices we make that reveal what we are in the sight of God. Look at verse 10 of Romans 14. For we shall all stand, I'm going to the second half of it, for we shall all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Verse 11, for it is written, as I live, says the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, every tongue shall confess to God. That's as it is written. Now look at the explanation that he gives in verse 12. So then, each of us shall give account of himself to God. Each. Heskaton. One by one by one by one. Most people don't mind group events. If you don't like what's going on, you can kind of blend back in the crowd. If you don't want your picture taken, you stand behind someone. If you don't like to sing, you just move your mouth and let them sing, okay? It's a group thing. Most people in America, one of their most dreaded things is public speaking, when you have to get up all by yourself and say something. You know what the Lord says? And by the way, Paul mentions this repeatedly. I mean, over and over and over. He calls it the day of Christ. He calls it the day of the Lord. And he talks about this future moment when we have to stand by ourselves. Verse 12. And give account. You ever notice how many of Christ's parables are about this accounting stuff? The talent thing. You know, the master goes away and gives them, and they're supposed to do something, and then they're supposed to come back. And we comfortably say, well, that means I'm supposed to use my piano playing abilities for the Lord. And so we comfort ourselves. It is much deeper than that. It is whether or not we lived for Him or not. Whether we lived not any longer for ourselves, but for Him that loved us, 2 Corinthians 5, and gave Himself for us. Well, what will matter when you stand in front of Jesus? What will you wish to have in your hands to give the one who loved you and gave himself for you? For a few years of my life, I had the privilege of standing next to someone that was adored and revered everywhere I went. He was known as the person that had led countless people to Christ, who had schooled countless people in doctrine. Of course, it was Dr. MacArthur. And when he would travel on the road, he'd always grab us young guys, and we'd ride with him or fly with him and travel with him, sometimes for weeks at a time. And it was wonderful. But what would happen is, after he would preach, would come this procession of people that knew he was there, and they had never met him before, and either they'd gotten saved over the radio or through reading one of his books, and they would come, most of them with something to give him. I mean, what do you give to the person that was the human instrument that saved you from eternal destruction? I mean, you just want to give him something. And so that's why a lot of the time we were there, because he would just hand those things to us, and we'd stand behind him. And you know what it most often was? Money. By the way, do you know what Dr. MacArthur did with money? I can remember time after time people would hand him, wads of currency. They'd say, this is just for you. Thank you for your ministry. And you know, he would look the crowd over before he spoke, and he'd pick out people he felt were poor and needy. And he'd alert us, and at the end of the service, when people come and do that, he'd look right at them and say, thank you. And he'd take it, and as they turned away, he'd hand it to one of us. And he had already told us who to take it to. I remember so many times walking up to someone and saying, this is a gift for you from someone, they just thought you need it. And to look at the utter disbelief. But you know, the moral of that story is those people that gave him the gifts thought so much of him. When you, verse 12, stand before the one that loved you and gave yourself for him, what are you going to have in your hands to give him? Are you working on that gift? Are you thinking about it? What is he worthy of receiving from us? That's what Paul wants us to think about. Because whatever that is, that's what we need to be doing today. And we need to come before His throne and think about that awesome moment. So let's go back to the book of Revelation. And I want you in chapter 5, we're going to get a running start through it. And I hope actually chart the things that are priceless in heaven. They might be worthless on earth, but they're priceless in heaven. That's where I want to get. And that's what I hope your communion offering of worship to the Lord is, that you say, if that's what you love, that's what I want to give. If this is what pleases you, that's what I want to do. Okay, just so you know where we're headed. Okay, Revelation 5. Because we're looking through the eyes of the prophets and the apostles, and we see heaven through their eyes. John, Daniel, Ezekiel, these other people we're looking at actually were there. We have a flawless picture. Revelation 5 is the first one, starting in verse 11. Then I looked and I heard the voice of many angels around the throne. Heaven, by the way, is not only silent at times. It appears to be just a cacophony of sounds. And here's one of those sounds. The voice of many angels around the throne. So it's just, every time I say this, I think of when I venture into my beehive out back. We have a few thousand bees living in there, and I wear my little suit and puff my little smoke thing at them. I act like I know what I'm doing, and I get my tool and I open that top and I take it off, and all of a sudden you instantly hear the sound. They know something's happening, and it goes from not hearing anything to it's just getting louder and louder, and they all start moving, and of course they do their thing, and I with smoke at them. But that's what I think about, just this constant angels, these countless angels around the throne, and you can hear their voices. Verse 11, and the living creatures, and we already know what they say from last Sunday. They're crying out loudly, holy, the trisagion, holy, holy, holy. It says that they're crying that out. They're kind of up here. They're above the throne and circling around. And then around the throne, down on the kind of the floor or ground level, are all these angels and the elders. And the number of them, that's the angels, was hundreds of millions and millions of millions. And they're saying with a loud voice, us, the 24 elders, which speaks as representative of the priesthood that believers of all ages have to Christ, and the creatures, these living creatures, and the angels, all of us in unison are saying this 12th verse, which we sing often, worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing. Isn't that amazing to know what we're going to be saying? Those angels capture our attention. Those countless white-robed angels standing like living walls of pure white robes, rising, reflecting the light of God. They rise and fall to the sounds of these four creatures as they crisscross the expanse of the four corners of the throne. They move as one. The angels are falling down on their faces with the 24 elders as together they speak the wonders of the glory of God. Now, slip down to, actually back to chapter 4, verse 5 of Revelation, because the second attention-riveting part of heaven is not just these countless angels, but what's going on in front of us, because it says in verse 5, and from the throne proceeded lightnings, thunderings, and voices. So here's, if you can think about it, hundreds of millions, the sounds of the voices of hundreds of millions of angels. And these holy, holy up here. But out of the throne itself, see what it says? From the throne, God's throne, are proceeding lightnings. And Ezekiel says it looks like the lightning is actually, you can see through the throne. It looks like it's inside, radiating, kind of like, that's why I love Oklahoma thunderstorms. You get a good one where the lightning's going that way instead of this way, and it's in a cloud. Those are the really neat ones where it's kind of muted a little bit, and it's, you can see it going out like that. That's the description that Ezekiel and Daniel and here John have of what's going on inside this throne. It's just lightning and thunderings. So there's this huge reverberating sound and voices. That's interesting. I don't know what that is, but it's there. And 7 lamps of fire, verse 5, were burning before the throne. So I just imagine geysers or something, just pillars of fire. There's 7 of them. So it's like a throne, and 7 fire things, flames like this, are right in front of it, which are, it says, the 7 spirits of God. And it appears that these could be, because they're alluded to in other places, the 7 that Luke talks about, angels that always face God. There seems to be this group of angels that always face God. Maybe that's talking about the seraphim and the cherubim. I don't know, but all I know is that they're burning like flames, these 7 spirits of God. Look at verse 6. Before the throne with all the lightning going out and the thunders and the voices, there's a sea of glass like crystal. And in the midst of the throne and around the throne, those 4 living creatures, full of eyes, front and back. Can you imagine a creature that's just covered with eyes, that's not a monster in a science fiction movie, but is a creature utterly devoted to worship to God? And these, verse 7, the first was like a lion, which parallels Christ, King of the Jews, which parallels the Gospel by Matthew. The second living creature was like a calf, which parallels Jesus Christ, the suffering servant, which parallels the whole Gospel of Mark, which, by the way, all these are in the Old Testament, prefiguring the coming perfect one. And the third creature had the face of a man, which parallels, by the way, they're even in the right order, because that parallels the Gospel by Luke, which presents Christ as the perfect man, for the Greeks who wanted a perfect man. So this creature that had the face of a man. And the fourth creature was like a flying eagle. Isn't it interesting that these creatures are mentioned in the same order as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the same representative image that were on the standards of we could go into this. All the tribes of Israel gathered around these 4 creatures' faces too. But they organized Israel that way. They were in the tabernacle, and now they're around the throne. This is important to God. Like a flying eagle, which is a picture of Christ as divine, which is the whole theme of the Gospel by John. And verse 8, the 4 living creatures, each having 6 wings, were full of eyes around and within. That's an interesting thought. Around and within, eyes. And they do not rest night or day, saying, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. And whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to Him, who sits on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before Him who sits on the throne and worship Him who lives forever and ever. People always say, what are we going to be doing in heaven? Sounds like we got a full schedule already. You're listening, and as soon as you hear the cherubim screaming out from the sky, the expanse around the throne, holy, 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 you fall, and I fall, and we fall on our faces before Him. To think that we can offer worship to God. But now comes what we need to get ready for. Look what these angels do. At the end of verse 10, and cast their crowns before the throne. Because of this, every time the creatures speak, they cast their crowns. It appears to be that you get to get them back, and then you cast them, and you get to get them back, and you get to cast them. It's kind of like an eternal memorial that you keep getting to offer to the Lord. Do you ever think about that? Not one time. It's not like saying, well, I was really busy in my career and school and my life and my everything else, and so I only got to do this, but there you go. That's over with. There seems to be an eternal casting going on here. Because it says, every time the creatures say the trisagion, the holy, 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 the 24 fall on their faces and cast the crowns. It's an interesting thought. If that's how it is, then it's really important what we do while we're here on earth, because it's what we're going to be giving as our offering forever. That's why it's very sobering to think, only one life 'twill soon be past, and only what's done for Christ will last. Remember who said that? C.T. Studd on his deathbed. And his next line was, I'm sorry that this is all I have to give. And he gave his entire life. He was so into this, he wanted to have longer to give more of his life to the Lord. Okay, and they say, as they cast the crowns, verse 11, you are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power. If you're one that likes to study stuff, they alternate between the sevenfold, that's chapter 5, worthy is the Lamb slain to receive power and riches and wisdom, strength, honor, and glory and blessing. That's 7 different elements, and this one only has 3. You're worthy to receive glory, honor, and power. And then they talk about you created all things, and by your will they exist and were created. But as you back up, your eyes go from from looking at these angels and then looking at this floor and all the flames and all this casting going on to looking at the throne itself. And I want you to see in chapter 7 of Daniel, where we were last time, but I just want to remind you of it, back up to Daniel 7 and verse 9, because I want you to see the throne again. I want you to see the magnificence of the setting that all this is going on. Daniel 7 and verses 9 and 10. Because central to heaven is the throne of God. And central to the book of Revelation is this throne that's completely encircled by this rainbow that's over and around and beneath it that John talked about. And we're overwhelmed by the massive rumble of power and the endless peals of thunder and the flashes of lightning that radiate outward from within. And as we're listening to all that, something else is going on. There's a waterfall. There's a river of fire. It says in Daniel Chapter 7, look at verse 9. I watched till thrones were put in place. By the way, thrones. See, these things are not looking at something in the future. He actually was seeing it happen. That's something that is very boggling. He didn't see a representation of the future. Each of these prophets actually saw the future. They saw it happening. And so when Daniel picks up, the thrones were being rolled into place for these 24 elders. The thrones, not the throne. God's throne's all set up. It's there. The thrones were coming. And the thrones were put in place. And the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow. The hair of his head was pure wool. That's Revelation 1, describing how Christ looks right now. Remember, God is a spirit. God doesn't have a robe. God the Father. As W.A. Criswell of Dallas so succinctly said when he preached through this, he said, the only God you'll ever see is Jesus Christ. You understand that? You're not going to see three people walking around up there. And you say, now which God are you? You know, it's one God in three persons. Two of them are represented by the dove, and because they're invisible spirits. The exact Hebrews 1:3 representation of God that you and I will see is Jesus Christ. He is the exact representation. He is the God that you will see. And that's who's on this throne. And it's who's wearing the robe and has the white hair. But keep looking at this. His throne was a fiery flame. Remember, I just told you about the lightning coming out, and it says it looks like a gemstone. The whole thing looks like a gemstone, but it's got lightning, but it's also on fire. And there seems to be something moving on it. Its wheels, whatever that is, are burning fire, and a fiery stream issued and came forth from before the throne. So there seems to be like a fountain and a river of fire flowing outward from this throne. And no one seems to be alarmed, because fire only burns away impurities, and there's nothing impure in heaven. And so there's this marvelous scene of this river of glowing fire coming out from before the throne, and 1,000 thousands ministered to him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. Didn't we just read that in Revelation? It's the same thing. Same place, same event. While you're in Daniel, back up to Isaiah 6, because I want to show you one more element before we get into what will matter there. Isaiah chapter 6. Because this is interesting. I love how the scriptures don't just leave us up there in na-na land, thinking about all the thunder and lightning and voices and all that. It always comes down home to, what should we do about it? What's the correct response to all this? Okay, here's one of them, because these creatures that are around God are called the burning ones. You ever heard of a seraph or a seraphim? That word in Hebrew means burning one. So there are these burning ones. They seem to be like they're on fire. And that's what Isaiah saw in Isaiah 6 in verse 1. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne. Same throne, here we are back. There it is. High and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphim, the burning ones. Each had 6 wings. They could be similar to the cherubim. Maybe it's another word for it. Maybe they're different. Maybe the cherubs with all the eyes are on fire too. there could be lots of orders of angels, much more than we know about. We just know the things that are revealed are what God wants us to know. We can think about it, but it doesn't matter whether there's different or the same or whatever. But these also had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their face. With 2 they covered their feet. And with 2 he flew. And one cried to another and said, sounds like we're playing the same tape again, doesn't it? We're back in Revelation. Look what it says. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. By the way, this is what Ezekiel saw. This is what Isaiah saw. And 600 years later, that's what John saw. And they're hearing the same words. They're seeing the same throne. They're seeing the same fire and creatures. And they're describing the future, but they were there, which is unbelievable. Only God can do that. And they said, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the posts of the doors were shaken by the voice of him who cried out. And the house was filled with smoke. And I said, here's the result. Woe is me, for I'm undone. I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. Why did he get all like that? Because my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. So the more he saw of God, the more he saw his sinfulness, and that caused him to cry out and not want to be that way. He wanted to be pleasing to God, and so the Lord heard the prayer of his heart, and look what happens. It says, and then one of these burning ones flew to me, having in his hand a live coal which he had taken with tongs from the altar, and he touched my mouth with it. And he said, behold, this has touched your lips. Your iniquity is taken away. Your sin is purged. Wow. Well, these 24 elders rising and falling, this throne burning, the living creatures crying out. Let's move to the book of Mark, chapter 12. What's going to matter when you and I are actually there? Mark 12 and verse 33 is where we're going to start. Because we already saw those 24 elders, which represent us as those who worship God, have a harp and a crown and a golden bowl, and the golden bowls contain the worship offered by God's saints on earth, the book of Revelation tells us. And every single elder and every saint falls on their face before him, and we offer our worship and we throw our crowns. So the question we need to ask ourselves is, how do you get one of those things to throw? Because I want to give him something. Now, the good news is if you're in heaven, you're going to have at least one, okay? Everybody gets one of the crowns. So breathe a little easier tonight. You don't have to work so hard to earn, some kind of offering for the Lord, because everyone gets one. The other 4 are not free to all. They are, as Paul says, from choices we make, okay? I'm going to talk about that with you, but Mark chapter 12, what is valuable in heaven? What is the currency of heaven? We can find that if we read carefully. In fact, and some of you still haven't decided what you're going to do when you read through the Bible this year. You could do this. You could look at all the scenes of heaven. They're all the way through the scriptures. You find them. I mean, Moses gets to go up there and he sees the sapphire blue crystal sea around the throne. And he actually gets with the elders of Israel to eat in front of God. What we're doing tonight at communion, only they were having a special meal as the covenant people of God. So you can find heaven all the way through the scriptures. That's a neat study. If you don't have anything else you're looking for, get a pen and mark that. But what is the offering that we get to offer to the Lord in heaven? What can we do on earth that matters in heaven? What can we do on earth that lasts in heaven? What can we do on earth that is precious and deposited in heaven? That's a constant source of study for me. And let me just show you how far I've gotten. These are as many as I've found, okay? Starting in Mark 12, verse 33, because the first one is this. Your devotion and my devotion can be a burnt offering, can be a sacrificial offering to God. That isn't giving something or doing something. It's something we have within us in our heart. Now look at what Jesus says. Mark 12:33. And to love him with all the heart and with all understanding and all the soul, and with all the strength, to love one's neighbor as oneself, is more than all the whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. Do you see what Christ wants? He wants more than all the outward activities, He's looking for the devotion of our hearts. And that's a pretty private thing. Because all of us can go through motions and can fulfill duties, dutifully do our work for the Lord. More than all those offerings and sacrifices is the love with all of our heart, with as much as we understand about God, with all of our soul, with all of our strength, that goes outward into the lives of others. That devotion. Let me ask you this, okay? Just to apply it. Have you offered your devotion up to Christ irretrievably? You remember the whole context as we look at Christ talking here in verse 33. They're asking this teacher, he says, I want to know from the Scriptures. I know it says that. I just want to know how to do it. And what Jesus does is, Jesus tells him, you're not far. You understand that it's a heart attitude. And then the gospel writers record, and we don't have time to look at them, but Jesus has all these people that are irretrievably offering that devotion to him. Like the woman that broke the alabaster flask and poured it out. She couldn't get it back. That was a physical picture of what he's talking about here. What have you and I irretrievably, completely, and lovingly given up for Christ? Now, what are some things we can do? We can give him time every day because we love him. You know, if you love anybody on earth, you want to be around him. You want to spend time with him, right? Do you love Jesus so much you want to spend time with him? That you irretrievably, completely give him time. Not time that you're distracted and saying, oh, got 3 more minutes, got to get this devotion thing over with. I mean, you know, kiss your wife that way. Go, I got to go, I got 30 seconds for that one, you know. She go, oh, thanks. You know, that was really thoughtful of you. You know, I appreciate that you're in such a hurry that that's a bother for you. I mean, you know what I mean? Love, we want to spend unhurried time. Do you want to have that kind of devotion for Christ? That's an offering that we can offer to him. How about giving him our complete attention as we focus on his word and prayer? I don't just mean the time. A lot of people spend the time. I mean that I say, this is your time. You have my full attention. It can be for 1 minute, 30 minutes, 5 minutes, but you're going to have the devotion. See, a lot of people talk about having their devotions with an S. I say, he doesn't want your devotions. That's something you do. He wants your devotion. That's something you have for him. And that's something that Jesus Christ said, you will never lose. You'll never lose your reward if you have devotion. If you love me with all of your heart. Maybe not every moment of your life, but those times of utter, irretrievable devotion to him he loves. Here's another one, just that you know so well. Look at Romans 12 and think of it in a different way. You know Romans 12, 1 and 2. Turn there with me. Let me show it to you in a different light. Romans 12, 1 and 2. We learn it at camp when we're little. We learn it in Awana. We know it as a verse. I beseech you, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your body. Your body, your life, my life can be a sacrifice to God. He says, give me your devotion and follow through with that devotion by giving me a vehicle to work with. I want your body. I want you to give me your body and say it's all yours. It's verse 1, a living, alive sacrifice for you. Now, all of us, as soon as we heard that, sometime in our life have said, you can have it. But you know what happens? By default, kind of like your computer, if it gets mixed up, you go back to the default settings. And you know what? We're just like the machines we make. When we get mixed up, we revert to our default settings. And you know what our default setting is? It's not Romans 12:1. And what we need to do is renew that offering of all we are to Him. We repeat the simple words. Did you know our family, we're reading through the Bible, we're in 1 Samuel. We were just reading about little boy Samuel. Remember Hannah, his mother, presented him to Eli the priest, and he lives in the tabernacle back then, and he's sleeping in his little place, wherever it was in the tabernacle, and he hears a voice, and he jumps up and runs to Eli and says, yes, yes, yes. And he said, I didn't call you, go back to bed. And so then he goes and lays down, he hears a voice again, he goes, yeah, Eli, what do you want? He said, I didn't call you, go back to bed. And finally Eli went, yeah, that's the Lord. This time Samuel, in bed, don't come running to me. Look up and say, speak, Lord, your servant's listening. We went through that. I enjoyed so much having everybody reading that. I said, oh, stop. I looked at each member of my family and myself, and I said, have you ever said, speak, Lord, I'm your servant. This body is yours. It belongs to you. What do you want me to do? Those simple, child, understandable words. You know what was so sweet after that challenge? That was some night last week, and, tucked all of them in bed. You know what was so sweet? Next morning, they're all getting up, and wandering around, and one of the little buddies came up to me and said, I said that to the Lord this morning. I mean, it was 12 hours later. I said what? Great dad, right? Right in tune with this spiritual moment. I said what? And then he just got this heavenly look, and he went, speak, Lord. And I was just smitten. I thought, oh, it's last night's story. He remembered. And he says, when I got out of bed this morning, I said, what, Lord, do you want me to do? Now, if a 7-year-old can do that, can 17-year-olds, 27, 37, 57, 87? Those simple, childlike words, speak, Lord, your servant is listening, delights the Lord. And that's what Romans 12:1 is about. You and I can offer our life, not once at a campfire 25 years ago, but tonight. Say, speak to me, Lord, your servant's listening. Tomorrow morning, Lord, I'm your servant. This body's yours. My devotion is toward you. How do you want me to serve you today? Can you imagine what God will do if you really mean it? He will intersect with your life and my life, and He will make us have such a joyful, confident awareness that all that I'm doing today is redeeming time for eternity, and I am building up that for which I can forever offer as worship to Him. One last one. Look at Philippians. You're in Romans. Keep going to the right to Philippians 2. And by the way, I said I collect these. I could go on and on. I have a whole collection of these because as I read through the Bible, I ask the Lord, what counts forever? And here's a beautiful one that Paul has in Philippians 2:17. He says, Philippians 2:17, I am being poured out as a drink offering on the sacrifice and service of your faith, and I am glad and rejoice with you all. What's he saying? He's saying his service for Christ's church was a drink offering. What's a drink offering? We're so far removed from Jewish life. A drink offering was when the priest would take what they brought in, their wine, and they would take it and they would pour it out. And where was the tabernacle? It was out in the sand. And they would pour it out, and when you put a liquid in the Sinai desert, that sand goes, it's gone. I mean, you couldn't dig fast enough to get it. It's gone. And what Paul said is, my strength, my life, my breath, I'm pouring out in the service of Christ's church. And it's gone. It's irrecoverable. I can't get it back. Are you pouring out what you cannot keep to Christ? If so, you can't lose it. Now think of some things. Each time you serve, in your heart, if you serve in a classroom, look up. Say, Lord, I'm irretrievably pouring out this time for you. You serve in the nursery? Say, walk in. They'll think you're looking at the stained tiles, up on where the water used to leak. And you look up and you say, no, I'm not looking at that. Saying, Lord, I'm irretrievably pouring out this time to you that I serve. You serve Wednesday night with the masses of kids in Awana. When you walk into your post, your listening post, or your room and you're setting it up, pause for a second. And you'll get a thrill in your heart. You know what happens? We just kind of do stuff. And we don't stop. Say, Lord, I'm offering this time to you. I'm giving you this time. Down in the choir room or off, wherever you serve, where you teach or in outreach or whatever. And say, I'm giving this time to you. I can't keep it. I could selfishly squander it, but instead I give it to you as an act of devotion and worship. And that's what Paul said. Look at verse 17. I am being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service of your faith. And I am glad. You can do that when you give. Yeah, my poor usher always takes a millisecond longer over on this side. Because when I see that bag coming, I reach in, pull out my check, and in that moment I'm holding it and I say, Lord, I'm giving this to you. Now, yes, it's going in that little, soft velvet bag with those handles, and I know it, and I know there's going to be some men somewhere that are going to be separating and flattening them, and someone's going to type it all in. But I didn't give it to the machine. I didn't give it to the organization. I didn't give it to the... Did you all just get your little sheet in the mail, that shows all your gifts? No. I gave it to Christ. And you can make each gift of your time in that room or on that ministry or in that rehearsal or in that service work or pick-up day and clean-up day or whatever. Offering, you can say, look at this, I am pouring out like a drink offering. I'm giving something that I could grasp to and hold on to, my time or my treasures, and I'm giving it to you. I'm pouring it out irretrievably for you. That's just a few. Our gifts can be fragrant worship offerings. Our worship can be a praise offering. Our deeds can be spiritual sacrifices. Our prayers can be incense. Think about the moment when you're going to stand and you're going to hear that sound of those angels as they start saying, holy. And as you hear that, you start feeling yourself falling down and casting what you were in this life for Jesus Christ. What you did by His grace. What you denied of yourself. And irretrievably offered to Him. Your time, your treasures, your devotion, prayers, sacrificial ministry in others' lives. You're going to be casting that before Him. I don't know how He's going to get them back to us, but we're going to hear the call again. We're going to cast it again. Let's bow before Him. Father in heaven, I thank you. I thank you that we get to come tonight to sync with heaven. In this moment when we bow before you and we push everything else out and we seek your cleansing and ask for your filling, we're in concert with what is constantly rising before your throne. And our worship tonight can rise like an offering before you as you sit on your throne. You're here tonight, you're meeting with us. Lord Jesus, you've told us in Revelation, you're actually walking up and down the aisles, looking for whether with our whole heart we'll seek you tonight. And I pray that we might. The greatest thing we can do is to worship you. Worship the Lord thy God. In Him only we can serve. But we want to worship. Energize our worship. Thank you for the bread which portrays your body which was given for us. Thank you that you gave yourself for me. And I pray that all I have, I would give back to you and all of us tonight. For your glory we ask. In the name of Jesus, amen.